He owned hundreds of Bibles. He also owned books on Hinduism, Buddhism, theosophy, numerology, and the occult. He gave away Cadillacs on a whim, convinced it was his spiritual duty. He wore a cross, a Star of David, and an Egyptian ankh, all at the same time. We think we know Elvis Presley, king the gyrating hips, the sequined jumpsuits. But what if the man inside the suit was a seeker? Be a mystic? Someone who spent his sleepless nights not just with women and pills, but with dusty old books, searching for the meaning of life and death. Did he really believe he could heal people with a touch? Was he convinced he had a secret Jewish heritage? The stories about Elvis's spiritual life are far stranger and more compelling than the story of his fame. Forget the icon. Let's look at the man who asked the universe the same questions we all do. Number 17, was his gospel music just an act? Everyone knows Elvis loved gospel music. It was the only genre where he won Grammy Awards during his lifetime. 3 of them all for gospel recordings. The 1967 album, How Great Thou Art, is a masterpiece. His performance of the title track is raw and powerful. You can feel the conviction. But was it real? Or was it just another performance like the swaggering rock star or the cheesy movie hero? It's a fair question. Elvis was the ultimate showman. He knew how to sell a song. He knew how to make an audience feel what he wanted them to feel. The truth is, it was probably the realest part of him. This wasn't something he discovered later in life. It started in childhood. He grew up in Tupelo, Mississippi, dirt poor. The family's life revolved around the First Assembly of God Church. This wasn't a quiet, formal church. It was Pentecostal, it was loud, there was speaking in tongues, faith healing, and music that shook the building. People got swept up in the spirit. That music got inside him before rock and roll ever did. His mother, Gladys, was a true believer. She and Vernon would take young Elvis to all-night gospel sings. He saw performers like the Blackwood Brothers and the Statesmen Quartet. He studied how they moved on stage, how they commanded a crowd. He learned showmanship in church. Later, when he became the most famous man in the world, gospel was his escape. The guys in his entourage, the Memphis Mafia, talked about it all the time. After a show in Vegas, he wouldn't go out and party. He'd gather a few guys, find a piano, and sing gospel songs until dawn. J.D. Sumner, a legendary bass singer who performed with Elvis, said those late-night sessions were like church. It was where Elvis reconnected with something pure. He wasn't the king then. He was just a guy from Tupelo singing songs about God. The evidence is in the music itself. Listen to his 1972 gospel album, He Touched Me. The passion is undeniable. It's not the polished sound of a pop star cashing in on a trend. It's the sound of a man wrestling with his faith, finding comfort in old hymns. He didn't have to make those records. By the 70s, he could have done anything he wanted. Or Colonel Tom Parker, his manager, certainly wasn't pushing for gospel albums. They didn't sell like his rock and roll hits, but Elvis insisted. It was a non-negotiable part of his life. For him, gospel wasn't an act. It was the foundation. The rest of his spiritual journey, all the strange paths he went down, were built on top of that Pentecostal bedrock. He was always searching, but he always had a home to come back to. But what if that foundation was also a source of his greatest conflict? If he believed so deeply in the gospel message of salvation and righteousness, how did he reconcile that with the pills, the excess, the man he saw in the mirror? Did singing those songs soothe his soul, or did it just amplify his guilt? And could his lifelong love for gospel music have been less about faith and more about a desperate attempt to connect with his beloved deceased mother? Number 16, did Elvis secretly have Jewish roots? This one sounds like it came from the internet, but the story of Elvis's Jewish heritage has been around for decades. And it comes from a surprising place. Elvis himself, he believed it. The connection comes through his maternal great-great-grandmother, Nancy Tackett. Her maiden name was Burdine, and family lore passed down to Elvis through his mother Gladys was that the Burdines were Jewish. And Gladys's mother was named Doll Mansell. Her mother was Martha Tackett, whose mother was the said Nancy Burdine. It's a bit of a family tree puzzle. The story goes that Gladys, who Elvis adored, kept this part of her heritage quiet. In the deep south of the 1930s and 40s, being Jewish could make you an outsider. But she apparently told Elvis. After Gladys died in 1958, Elvis was devastated. It was the single most traumatic event of his life. In his grief, he started to embrace the things that connected him to her. This included her supposed Jewish ancestry. He had a Star of David placed on his mother's tombstone at Forest Hill Cemetery in Memphis. He did this in 1960. It's still there today, right above the cross. His actions didn't stop there. He started wearing a chai necklace, a Jewish symbol for life. You can see it in photos from the 70s, often alongside a cross. He gave money to Jewish organizations, including the Memphis Jewish Community Center. Larry Geller, his hairdresser and spiritual guide, was Jewish. Elvis peppered him with questions about Judaism. He wanted to understand the traditions and the beliefs. According to Geller's book, If I Can Dream, Elvis felt a deep, almost mystical connection to the Jewish people. He saw them as a spiritual people who had suffered, and he identified with that. Is the story true? That's harder to say. Genealogists have tried to trace the Burdine line. There isn't a clear documented paper trail proving Jewish ancestry. Some researchers, like Elaine Dundee in her 1985 biography, Elvis and Gladys, found evidence that the family might have had Jewish origins, but it's not definitive. What matters more, perhaps, is that Elvis believed it. For him, it wasn't about religious law or proving a bloodline. It was a spiritual and emotional connection. It was a way to honor his mother. It was a way to feel part of something ancient and resilient. In his vast spiritual search, he collected beliefs like he collected cars. And for a time, Judaism was a piece of the puzzle he was trying to solve. It sat right alongside his Pentecostal upbringing, a contradiction he was perfectly willing to live with. But if he truly embraced this identity, why was it kept so quiet for most of his life? Was he afraid of the reaction from his Christian fanbase in the South? Or was this connection less about a genuine ancestral link and more about a grieving son clinging to any piece of his mother he could find? And what did it mean for him to place a Star of David on his mother's grave years after her death, a decision made in her absence? Number 15, could he really heal people with his hands? This is where the story starts to get strange. We're moving beyond organized religion and into the realm of personal mystic power. The rumor is that Elvis believed he had the power to heal people with his touch. It sounds like a tabloid headline, but according to many people who were close to him, he was dead serious about it. This belief seems to have taken root in the mid-1960s, around the time he met Larry Geller. Geller introduced Elvis to a world of esoteric thought, and one of the concepts was the idea of channeling spiritual energy. The stories are numerous. Bernard Lansky, his clothier from Memphis, told a story about having a migraine headache. Elvis came into a store, saw Lansky was in pain, and put his hands on his head. Lansky swore the headache vanished instantly. Another story involves a woman who was a fan. She had a growth or a tumor. Elvis laid his hands on her and prayed. Later, she reportedly came back and said her doctors were amazed because the growth was gone. His friend and bodyguard Red West was skeptical of most of Elvis's spiritual pursuits, but even he admitted seeing things he couldn't explain. Elvis didn't see this as some kind of magic trick. He connected it to his Christian faith. It was a form of faith healing, something he would have seen as a child in the Pentecostal church. He believed God was working through him. He would often say, "It's not me, it's God's power." He studied the auras and chakras, believing he could sense and manipulate a person's energy field. He would talk about feeling a heat or an electricity in his hands when he was healing. Priscilla Presley wrote about this in her book Elvis and Me. She described how he would try to heal her headaches or other minor ailments. She seemed to view it with a mix of affection and skepticism. For her, it was part of his intense, searching nature. He desperately wanted to believe he could make a difference, that he had a special purpose beyond just singing songs. This belief in his healing powers gave him a sense of mission. It elevated him from an entertainer to a vessel for something divine. It was a heavy burden to carry. The pressure to be more than just a man weighed on him. Of course, there's no scientific proof for any of this. These are all anecdotes, stories told by people who were in his orbit. It's easy to dismiss it as the power of suggestion or wishful thinking. A headache going away after someone touches you isn't a miracle. But whether the healing was real or not is almost beside the point. Elvis believed it was real. And that belief tells us a lot about his state of mind. He was a man with immense power and fame, but he felt a deep emptiness. He was looking for a way to use his gifts for something more profound than making teenage girls scream. He wanted to ease suffering, but if he possessed this incredible power, Why couldn't he heal the most important person in his life himself? As his own health deteriorated from prescription drug abuse, did he ever try to turn that healing energy inward? And if he did and it failed, what did that failure do to his faith in the very gift he believed he possessed? Was his desire to heal others just a projection of his inability to fix his own pain? Number 14, why was he obsessed with a book called The Impersonal Life? Most people have never heard of it. It's a slim, strange little book. The Impersonal Life was first published in 1914. Its author is listed as anonymous, but it was written by Joseph S. Benner. The book is written as if God is speaking directly to the reader. It uses phrases like, I am, to describe the divine presence within every person. The core message is that the individual ego, the you that you think you are, is an illusion. The only reality is the universal consciousness, or God, that expresses itself through you. It's a mix of Christian mysticism and New Thought philosophy. Elvis discovered this book in 1964. He was in his Bel Air home, feeling lost and disillusioned with his movie career. He was making formulaic empty films, and he felt like a joke. Larry Geller gave him the book. And it hit Elvis like a bolt of lightning. You know, according to Geller, Elvis stayed up all night reading it. He was captivated. He felt like it was speaking directly to him, explaining the feelings of emptiness and purpose he had been struggling with. The idea that he, Elvis, was just a temporary vessel for a greater power was a profound relief. It took the weight of being Elvis Presley off his shoulders. He became an evangelist for the impersonal life. He bought hundreds of copies. He gave them to everyone, friends, family, bodyguards, even strangers. He would read passages aloud, trying to get people to understand its message. Priscilla wrote that he would read it to her for hours. For Elvis, this book was the key. It explained God in a way that made sense to him. It was a God that wasn't sitting on a cloud in heaven, but was inside him, inside everyone. This was a revolutionary idea for a boy raised in the Assembly of God Church. The book's influence can be seen in his thinking for the rest of his life. He started to believe his talent wasn't his own. It was something flowing through him. This explains some of his incredible generosity. If the money and fame weren't really his, why not give them away? They were just products of the IAM working through the vessel called Elvis. This philosophy also fed into his more messianic feelings. If God was speaking through him, then maybe he had a special message to deliver to the world, right? It was a powerful and dangerous idea. It could lead to humility, but it could also lead to an inflated sense of self-importance. In Elvis, it seems to have done both at the same time. He was a humble channel for God, but a very, very important one. But how could a man so obsessed with the idea of a selfless, impersonal life also be so famously trapped by his own ego and image? Was his devotion to the book a genuine spiritual practice, or was it a way to intellectually escape the crushing reality of being Elvis Presley? And if he truly believed his identity was an illusion, why did he work so hard to maintain the iconic look, the jumpsuit, the sideburns, right until the very end? Number 13 was his hairdresser, his personal guru. It sounds like a joke. The king of rock and roll's spiritual guide was his hairdresser. But it's the truth. Larry Geller was far more than just the man who styled Elvis's famous hair. He was the catalyst for Elvis's deepest dive into esoteric spirituality. They met on April 30th, 1964. Elvis was getting his hair done for a movie. Geller wasn't just a stylist, he was a student of religion and philosophy. He was into things Elvis had never heard of: yoga, mysticism, Eastern religions. They started talking. Elvis was immediately fascinated. Before Geller, Elvis's spirituality was mostly confined to his gospel roots. He was searching, but he didn't have a map. Geller gave him a library of maps. He brought Elvis books, stacks of them. The Impersonal Life was the first. But then came Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, The Secret Doctrine by Helena Blavatsky, and books on numerology, astrology, and the life of Jesus from an occult perspective. Geller became Elvis's constant companion. They would spend hours, often entire nights, talking about these ideas. They would meditate together. Geller taught Elvis about chakras, auras, and astral projection. This relationship caused a huge rift in Elvis's inner circle. Colonel Tom Parker hated Geller. The Colonel wanted Elvis to be a simple, all-American entertainer. This spiritual stuff was weird and complicated. It was bad for the brand. The Memphis Mafia guys were also suspicious. They saw Geller as a strange outsider filling Elvis's head with bizarre ideas. They called him Rasputin. They were fiercely protective of Elvis, and they saw Geller as a threat. At one point, the pressure got so intense that Elvis's father, Vernon, and the colonel forced Elvis to fire Geller. They held a book burning, throwing all of Elvis's spiritual books into a bonfire in the backyard of his Graceland home. Elvis was heartbroken, but he couldn't stay away from the ideas Geller had introduced. A few years later, in 1967, he brought Geller back. The search was too important to him. Geller was with him for most of the rest of his life. He was there during the highs of the '68 comeback special, and he was there during the lows of the final drug-addled years. In Geller's perspective, which you can read in his own books, is that he was trying to help Elvis find a spiritual path that could save him from the pressures of his own fame. Others saw him as an enabler who encouraged Elvis's delusions of grandeur. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Geller opened a door for Elvis. What Elvis found on the other side was a combination of profound insight and deep confusion. He wasn't just a hairdresser, he was arguably the most influential person in the second half of Elvis's life. But was Larry Geller a genuine spiritual teacher guiding a lost soul, or was he a clever opportunist who saw a way to become indispensable to the world's biggest star? Did he truly believe in the spiritual systems he taught, or did he simply tell a lonely and searching man what he desperately wanted to hear? And ultimately, did Geller's guidance lead Elvis closer to enlightenment, or did it just provide a spiritual justification for his retreat from reality? Number 12. Did he believe he was a messenger from God? This is a dangerous path for any famous person. When millions of people treat you like a god, it's easy to start believing them. For Elvis, this wasn't just about ego, it was tied into his spiritual search. The idea came from the books he was reading with Larry Geller. Books like The Impersonal Life taught that God, or the I-am, works through individuals. Some people, the thinking went, were chosen to be clearer channels for this divine energy. Elvis started to believe he was one of those people. He wasn't just a singer. He was a vehicle, his voice, his fame, his connection with millions of people. It was all for a purpose. He believed he was meant to bring spiritual uplift to the world. He was supposed to use his platform to turn people towards God. You can see this in the If I Can Dream finale of his 1968 comeback special. It wasn't just a song, it was a sermon. It was a plea for peace and understanding delivered with the fire of a preacher. He poured every ounce of his conviction into that performance. He felt he was delivering a message. His friends saw this side of him. He would talk for hours about his mission. He felt the world was in trouble and that he had a role to play in healing it. This wasn't just talk. His incredible generosity was part of this. He didn't just give gifts. He felt a spiritual compulsion to share his wealth. He saw money as a form of energy that had to be kept flowing. Giving away a Cadillac wasn't a publicity stunt, it was a spiritual act. He was redistributing God's bounty. But this belief had a dark side. It isolated him. How can you have a normal conversation with someone who thinks he's a divine messenger? It also created immense pressure. If he failed, he wasn't just failing himself, he was failing God. When his life started to unravel in the 70s, with the divorce from Priscilla and his deepening drug addiction, this sense of failure was catastrophic. How could a messenger of God be so flawed, so human, so out of control? He would look in the mirror and see a bloated, sick man. That wasn't the image of a divine channel. It was the image of a fraud. This conflict between his spiritual aspirations and his physical reality tormented him. He was trapped between being a god and being a man, and the contradiction was tearing him apart. He desperately wanted to be a saint, but he was living the life of a sinner. Did Elvis's messianic beliefs stem from a genuine spiritual awakening, or were they a psychological defense mechanism against the crushing loneliness and absurdity of his own fame? When he looked out at a screaming crowd, did he see fans, or did he see a congregation waiting for a message he was no longer sure he could deliver? And was his inability to live up to his own divine expectations the ultimate source of the self-destruction that led to his death? Number 11, was he trying to start a commune in the desert? Yes, he was. This wasn't just a passing thought, it was a serious plan. In the mid-1960s, Elvis became obsessed with the idea of creating a spiritual retreat, a place where he and his closest friends could live and study, away from the craziness of Hollywood and the demands of fame. He envisioned a self-sufficient community, a modern-day monastery. He wanted to build a house or a collection of houses where everyone could dedicate themselves to the spiritual search. He even picked out a location. He was drawn to the desert, a place often associated with spiritual quests and visions. He considered areas in Arizona and near Palm Springs, California, where he already owned a home. The plan was detailed. He wanted to buy a large piece of land. He would be the spiritual leader, the teacher. Larry Geller would help him structure the curriculum. They would spend their days meditating, reading, and discussing philosophy. They would leave the outside world behind. It was a radical idea. It was his attempt to create a utopia, a safe space where his spiritual self could flourish without judgment. He felt completely isolated. His fame was a prison. He was surrounded by people, but he couldn't have a real conversation. The Memphis Mafia guys were his friends, but they were also his employees. They depended on him for their livelihood. He couldn't be sure who was a true friend and who was just along for the ride. And most of them didn't understand his spiritual quest. They thought he was being weird. The commune was a way to filter out the noise. He wanted to surround himself only with people who were on the same path, people he could trust. The plan ultimately fell apart. Colonel Parker got wind of it and was horrified. There's a spiritual commune in the desert. That was career suicide. It would destroy the Elvis image he had so carefully crafted. The colonel, along with Elvis's father Vernon, put immense pressure on him to drop the idea. They controlled his finances, so they had the power to stop him. Elvis was also a creature of comfort. The reality of living a simple, monastic life was probably less appealing than the fantasy. He was used to luxury. He was trapped by the golden cage he had built for himself. The dream of the commune represented his desire for a different life, a life of meaning and purpose. But in the end, he couldn't bring himself to walk away from being Elvis Presley. The escape he craved remained just a dream. But what if he had gone through with it? What would an Elvis-led spiritual commune have looked like? Would it have become a genuine center for spiritual learning, or would it have devolved into a cult centered around its charismatic leader? And did the failure of this dream mark a turning point? The moment when Elvis realized he could never truly escape the prison of his own persona, resigning himself to the path that would eventually destroy him. Number 10. Did he see a vision of his dead mother? Elvis's relationship with his mother Gladys was the central emotional relationship of his life. Her death in 1958, when he was just 23 and serving in the army in Germany, shattered him. He never fully recovered. His grief was a constant presence, and it profoundly shaped his spiritual search. He wasn't just looking for God, he was looking for Gladys. He desperately wanted to believe that death was not the end, that he could somehow communicate with her. This led him to explore spiritualism and psychic phenomena. He read books about life after death and mediums who could contact the other side. According to several accounts, including from his stepmother, D. Stanley Presley, Elvis had experiences he believed were visitations from his mother's spirit. The most famous story happened at Graceland. He was sitting in his mother's old room, feeling particularly lost and alone. Suddenly, he felt a presence. He saw a vision of her, smiling at him. She didn't speak, but he felt a sense of peace and reassurance wash over him. For him, this was not a dream or a hallucination. It was a real event. It was proof that she was still with him. He also believed she communicated with him in other ways. He would sometimes see a particular cloud formation in the sky and believe it was a sign from her. He talked to her picture. He felt her presence watching over him, especially during difficult times. This wasn't just the sentimentality of a grieving son. For Elvis, it was part of a larger spiritual framework. If his mother could exist in another plane, then the universe was far more mysterious and magical than he had been taught in church. It opened him up to ideas of reincarnation, spirit guides, and other dimensions of reality. His fascination with the paranormal was well known within his inner circle. He and his friends would sometimes experiment with seances, trying to contact spirits. These were often amateurish and probably fueled by the strange nocturnal energy of the house. But for Elvis, the desire was real. He wanted confirmation. He needed to know that the bond he had with Gladys was not broken by death. His entire search for the afterlife was, in many ways, a search for her. Finding God was secondary. Finding Gladys was the primary mission. But were these visions genuine supernatural events, or were they the product of intense grief, sleep deprivation, and a powerful imagination? Could his mind, desperate for comfort, have simply created the experiences he needed to survive the devastating loss of his mother? And if he truly believed he could communicate with her, what was the last message he thought he received before his own death? Number 9, why did he study the teachings of a Hindu yogi? For a boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, Raised on Southern gospel, embracing the teachings of a Hindu guru from India was a massive leap. But that's exactly what Elvis did. One of the most important books Larry Geller ever gave him was Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. Yogananda was a key figure in bringing yoga and meditation to the West. He founded the Self-Realization Fellowship in Los Angeles in the 1920s. His book is a spiritual classic, blending stories of his life with explanations of Hindu philosophy, Kriya Yoga, and the concept of a universal, non-denominational God. Elvis was captivated by the book. He read it over and over. He identified with Yogananda's spiritual quest. He was particularly drawn to the idea of a direct personal experience of God through meditation, rather than just through belief or church attendance. This was what Elvis was craving, not just to believe in God, but to feel God. The teachings of the Self-Realization Fellowship offered a practical path to achieve that. They taught techniques for meditation and spiritual discipline. Elvis even visited the Self-Realization Fellowship Lake Shrine in Pacific Palisades, California. It's a beautiful, peaceful garden with a shrine containing some of the ashes of Mahatma Gandhi. Elvis would go there to meditate and feel a sense of peace he couldn't find anywhere else. He seriously considered becoming a disciple. He talked about renouncing his life and moving into an ashram to study. He met with Daya Mata, the woman who took over leadership of the Self-Realization Fellowship after Yogananda's death. They had a long, profound conversation in 1965. Elvis asked her if he should give up his career to pursue a spiritual life. According to the story, she told him that his mission was in the world. He could reach more people and do more good as Elvis Presley than he could as a monk in a robe. He shouldn't run away from his life. He should use it for a higher purpose. This advice had a huge impact on him. It validated his feeling that his fame had a spiritual mission. He didn't have to choose between being a star and being a seeker. He could be both. He tried to integrate the teachings into his life. He meditated, though his schedule and lifestyle made it difficult to be consistent. He adopted the idea of Kriya Yoga, a specific breathing technique meant to accelerate spiritual evolution. He saw a deep connection between the Eastern idea of God as an all-pervading spirit and the I am concept from the Impersonal Life. It all fit together in his unique syncretic belief system. He was building his own religion, one piece at a time. But how did he reconcile the yogic emphasis on discipline, purity, and control of the senses with his own life of excess, indulgence, and addiction? Was his interest in Eastern philosophy a genuine search for enlightenment, or was it another form of spiritual tourism, collecting exotic beliefs without committing to the difficult practices they required? And what would have happened if Dayamata had given him different advice and told him to walk away from it all? Number 8. Was he a follower of a 19th century Russian mystic? This is one of the deepest cuts in the strange saga of Elvis's spiritual life. Most fans know about his love of gospel, and some have heard about his interest in yoga. But very few know about his connection to theosophy and its founder, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. Blavatsky was a controversial and fascinating figure. She was a Russian aristocrat who traveled the world in the late 19th century, claiming to have studied with mystical masters in Tibet. In 1875, she co-founded the Theosophical Society in New York. Theosophy is a complex belief system that attempts to synthesize all the world's religions and philosophies to uncover a single, ancient wisdom. It's heady stuff. Blavatsky's major work, The Secret Doctrine, is a massive, almost impenetrable book that claims to explain the origin of the universe and humanity based on a secret Tibetan text. Another one of her key books is Isis Unveiled. Theosophy talks about root races of humanity like Lemuria and Atlantis, cosmic cycles of evolution, and a hierarchy of spiritual masters who guide humanity from behind the scenes. It's a mix of Eastern religion, Western esotericism, and occultism. Elvis read it all. Larry Geller introduced him to theosophy, and Elvis dove in headfirst. He owned copies of The Secret Doctrine and other theosophical texts. The ideas resonated with him. He loved the concept of a secret, universal truth that connected all religions. It confirmed his own feeling that no single religion had all the answers. He was particularly fascinated by the idea of spiritual masters or adepts. He started to believe that figures like Jesus, Buddha, and Krishna were all part of this spiritual brotherhood. He also began to believe that he himself was in contact with these masters, that they were guiding him. This belief shaped his view of his own life. He wasn't just a lucky kid from Tupelo. His success was part of a cosmic plan. He was an old soul who had lived many lives and was now on an important mission, guided by unseen forces. This is where His sense of being a messenger got its philosophical underpinning. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a complex metaphysical system that explained his place in the universe. He would talk about this to his friends, trying to explain the intricate cosmology of Blavatsky. Most of them had no idea what he was talking about. It was another layer of isolation for him. He was exploring a mental and spiritual landscape where no one in his immediate circle could follow. But how could a man with a famously short attention span get through some of the densest and most difficult esoteric texts ever written? Was he truly grasping the complex philosophy of theosophy, or was he just cherry-picking the parts that made him feel important and special? And did his belief in unseen masters, guiding his life, absolve him of personal responsibility for his own choices and actions? Number 7. Did he believe numbers controlled his destiny? Beyond the grand philosophical systems, Elvis was also deeply into numerology. He believed that numbers held a secret vibrational meaning and that they could reveal the blueprint of a person's life and destiny. This wasn't a casual interest. He had his own numbers done and the numbers of people close to him. He would analyze dates and names, looking for hidden patterns and significance. This fascination seems to have come from his reading of occult and esoteric literature. Many of these traditions, from the Kabbalah to the teachings of Pythagoras, place a strong emphasis on the mystical properties of numbers. For Elvis, it was another tool to try and understand the invisible forces that shaped his life. He felt that his life was so extraordinary, so far beyond the normal rules of cause and effect, that there had to be a hidden logic to it. Numerology provided a kind of logic. One number that he was particularly interested in was the number 8. In some numerological systems, 8 is the number of power, wealth, and material success, but also of karmic balance. You reap what you sow. Elvis was born on January 8th. He saw this as deeply significant. He felt he was a power number person, destined for great things, but also subject to great challenges. He would point out other 8s in his life. He entered the army on the 24th 246, not 8, but he found patterns everywhere. The connections were sometimes a stretch, but he believed in them. He read books on the subject, like Shiro's Book of Numbers. Shiro was a famous palmist and numerologist from the early 20th century. Elvis would use these books to analyze everything. If he was considering a project or a trip, he might look at the numbers associated with the dates to see if it was an auspicious time. It was a way of trying to gain some control over a life that often felt completely out of his control. If he could understand the numbers, maybe he could understand his fate. This belief in numbers was part of a larger pattern. He was looking for signs and symbols everywhere. He believed in omens. He would see a bird and wonder what it meant. He would have a dream and spend days trying to decipher its message. He was living in a world that was enchanted, where everything was connected and nothing was a coincidence. For a man living a life that was so surreal, it made a strange kind of sense. His reality was so different from everyone else's that he needed a different set of rules to explain it. Well, numerology gave him a set of secret rules. But did this reliance on numerology give him a sense of control? Or did it make him more paranoid and superstitious, afraid to make a move without consulting a chart? How did he reconcile this belief in a predetermined destiny based on numbers with his Christian belief in free will and salvation? And in his final years, when the numbers of his life, his weight, his blood pressure, the doses of his medication were all pointing towards disaster, did he see it as a karmic destiny he couldn't escape? Number 6, was he using drugs to find God? This is the most controversial and tragic question of all. We know Elvis Presley died from an overdose of prescription drugs. His abuse of pills in the final decade of his life is a well-documented tragedy. He took uppers to wake up, downers to sleep, and painkillers for a host of real and imagined ailments. The standard story is that it was a simple, sad case of addiction, fueled by a quack doctor and the pressures of fame. But some people, including Larry Geller, have suggested a more complex motive. Was it possible that Elvis, at least initially, was using these substances as part of his spiritual search? The idea of using mind-altering substances to achieve spiritual states is ancient. From the peyote used in Native American ceremonies to the soma of ancient Hindu texts, many cultures have used chemicals to open the doors of perception. In the 1960s, this idea went mainstream with figures like Aldous Huxley and Timothy Leary. Psychedelic drugs like LSD were seen by many as a shortcut to enlightenment, a way to experience the divine unity that the mystics talked about. Elvis was a product of the 60s. He was aware of this movement. According to some accounts, he did experiment with LSD at least once in 1965. He and Priscilla and Larry Geller took it together. Elvis reportedly had a powerful experience. He saw a vision of himself as a baby in the womb. He felt a sense of cosmic unity. But he also found it frightening and disorienting. He didn't become a regular user of psychedelics. His drugs of choice were pharmaceutical amphetamines and barbiturates. These aren't typically considered spiritual drugs. But Elvis may have seen them differently. In his constant state of sleep deprivation and altered consciousness, the lines between reality and dream could blur. He believed he could leave his body and travel on the astral plane. He had visions. Were these genuine mystical experiences, or were they drug-induced hallucinations? For Elvis, there may not have been a difference. He was trying to escape the confines of his physical body and his ordinary mind. The pills helped him do that. He might have seen the uppers not just as a way to stay awake for a show, but as a way to achieve a higher state of energy and awareness. The downers weren't just for sleep, they were for entering a dream state where he could receive spiritual messages. This is a dangerous justification. It's the kind of rationalization that addicts often use. But given the intensity of his spiritual quest, it's plausible that he saw his drug use, at least for a time, as part of that journey. He was trying to peel back the layers of reality. He used books, meditation, and also a cocktail of chemicals. He was using every tool he could find. The tragedy is that one of those tools was poison. It promised him transcendence, but ultimately destroyed his body, and likely clouded the very spiritual clarity he was so desperately seeking. But can we truly separate the addict from the seeker? Was the spiritual language just a sophisticated excuse for a man who couldn't face his own addiction? Or was the addiction itself a symptom of a spiritual hunger so profound that he was willing to risk everything, including his own life, to satisfy it? And in the end, did the drugs lead him to any kind of heaven, or did they just create a private, inescapable hell? Number 5. Did Elvis think he lived past lives? The idea of reincarnation is central to many Eastern religions like Hinduism and Buddhism. It's also a key component of theosophy, so it's no surprise that Elvis, after his deep dive into these subjects, came to believe in it. The concept that the soul lives many lifetimes, learning and evolving with each one, appealed to him deeply. It offered an explanation for his own strange life, his incredible talent, his instant fame, his deep connection with millions of people. Maybe these weren't just accidents. Maybe they were the result of experiences from other lives. He talked about it openly with his inner circle. He felt he was an old soul. He had a sense of déjà vu about certain people and places. He felt he had known some of his closest friends before. He would sometimes speculate about who he might have been in a past life. Was he a great artist? A spiritual teacher? A simple farmer? He was fascinated by the possibilities. This belief also gave him a sense of comfort about death. If this life was just one chapter in a very long book, then death wasn't an end. It was just a transition. It was a chance to rest before the next assignment. This belief in reincarnation connected to his belief in karma. The idea that your actions in this life would determine your circumstances in the next one resonated with his Christian sense of right and wrong. It was a cosmic system of justice. This is another reason for his radical generosity. Giving away money and gifts wasn't just about being a good person in this life. It was about creating good karma for the future. He was making deposits in his spiritual bank account. Priscilla Presley wrote about his belief in reincarnation. She said he would tell her that they had been together in other lives and that they would find each other again. It was a romantic and powerful idea. It gave their relationship a sense of cosmic significance. For a man whose present life was so chaotic and often unhappy, the idea of other chances, other lives, was a profound source of hope. It meant that his mistakes weren't final. He could learn from them and do better next time. It offered a kind of redemption that he struggled to find in the here and now. The man who seemed to have everything in this life was already planning for the next one. But was his belief in past lives a profound spiritual conviction? Or was it a form of escapism, a way to devalue a present life that had become painful and disappointing? Did it give him comfort, or did it prevent him from fully grappling with the consequences of his actions in this life? And if he believed so strongly in returning, did that make it easier for him to be careless with the one body and the one life he had right now? Number 4, why did he give away millions of dollars? Elvis's generosity is legendary. The stories are almost unbelievable. He bought cars for friends, acquaintances, and even total strangers. He paid off people's mortgages. He gave jewelry, cash, and houses. It's estimated he gave away millions of dollars over the course of his career. On the surface, it looks like the impulsive behavior of a man who had more money than he knew what to do with. But for Elvis, it was deeply tied to his spirituality. It was a core practice of his personal religion. It started with his background. He grew up with nothing. He knew what it was like to be poor. When he finally made it, he wanted to share the wealth, but it went deeper than that. The books he was reading in the 60s and 70s reinforced this impulse and gave it a philosophical framework. The Impersonal Life taught that nothing truly belonged to him. He was just a steward of the energy and abundance flowing through him. To hoard, it was to block that flow. To give it away was to participate in the divine circulation of energy. His belief in karma was also a huge factor. Every gift was an investment in his own spiritual future. He believed that the good you put out into the world comes back to you, if not in this life, then in the next. He wasn't just being nice, he was practicing a spiritual law. He would often say, the more you give, the more you get. For him, this was a literal truth of how the universe worked. He saw his own incredible wealth as proof of this law. He had been given so much, so he had to give it back. There was also a messianic element to it. He saw himself as a healer, and this didn't just apply to laying on of hands. He could heal people's problems with his money. If someone was sick and couldn't afford a doctor, he would pay the bill. If someone was about to lose their home, he would save it. These were practical miracles. He got a profound, almost godlike satisfaction from being able to solve people's earthly problems with a stroke of a pen. It was a tangible way for him to exercise the divine power he felt he possessed. Of course, not everyone saw it this way. His father, Vernon, who managed his finances, was often horrified by his son's reckless spending. He saw it as irresponsible, but Elvis wouldn't listen. The spiritual need to give was stronger than any financial logic. It was a compulsion. It was his way of proving to himself and to God that he hadn't been corrupted by his wealth. It was his way of staying connected to the common people he came from. He was the king, but he wanted to be the people's king, a benevolent ruler who shared his kingdom's riches. But was this generosity a pure spiritual expression, or was it also driven by a desperate need for love and approval? Did he give things to people to control them and keep them loyal, and could his compulsive giving have been a way of trying to buy his way into heaven, a frantic attempt to balance the karmic scales against the sins he knew he was committing? Number 3, did a UFO sighting shape his beliefs? Of all the strange stories about Elvis's spirituality, this one is the most out there. The idea that Elvis Presley was a believer in UFOs and ancient aliens seems like a parody. But according to Larry Geller and others, it was a serious part of his worldview. His interest in the paranormal wasn't limited to ghosts and spirits. It extended to the cosmos. The story begins with his birth. According to family accounts, on the night Elvis was born, January 8th, 1935, his father Vernon and others saw a strange blue light hovering in the sky above their small shack in Tupelo. It was an unexplained phenomenon that became part of the family mythology. Was it a star, an atmospheric event, or was it something more? For Elvis, who loved a good omen, this story was proof that his birth was a special event marked by a sign from the heavens. Later in life, as he read more esoteric literature, this story took on new meaning. Books on theosophy and other occult systems often talked about beings from other planets and dimensions who have guided humanity's evolution. The idea of ancient astronauts, popularized in the 70s by authors like Erich von Däniken, fit right into this worldview. The theory that the gods of ancient mythologies were actually extraterrestrial visitors fascinated Elvis. It connected his religious beliefs with a kind of science fiction cosmology. He reportedly had his own sightings. Larry Geller describes driving with Elvis through the desert in Nevada when they both saw strange, unexplained lights moving in the sky in ways that no conventional aircraft could. They were convinced they had seen a UFO. For Elvis, this wasn't just a curiosity. It was confirmation. It meant we are not alone. It meant the universe was infinitely more complex and mysterious than mainstream science or religion taught. This belief in UFOs and aliens wasn't a separate, quirky interest. It was fully integrated into his spiritual system. He believed these beings were spiritually advanced. They were like angels or the masters of theosophy. They were watching over humanity, perhaps waiting for us to become spiritually mature enough for open contact. His mission, as he saw it, was part of this larger cosmic drama. By raising spiritual consciousness on Earth, he was helping to prepare humanity for the next stage of its evolution, a stage that might involve our cosmic neighbors. It sounds bizarre, but for a man trying to synthesize all the world's mysteries into one grand theory, it made perfect sense. But how much of this was a genuine belief, and how much was just a fascination with the sci-fi and occult fads of the era? Did he ever try to initiate contact himself through meditation or some other means? And if he truly believed he saw a UFO with Geller in the desert, was it a real event, or was it a shared hallucination between two men who desperately wanted to believe in something magical? Number 2, was he preparing for his own death? In the last 2 years of his life, from 1975 to 1977, Elvis's health was in a steep decline. He was overweight, sick, and heavily dependent on a massive cocktail of prescription drugs. He was often depressed and paranoid, but at the same time, his spiritual quest became more intense, more focused. He seemed to be obsessed with one topic in particular, death. He wasn't just afraid of it, he was studying it. He was trying to prepare for it. He filled his bedroom at Graceland with books on death and dying. He read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, an ancient text that serves as a guide for the soul's journey through the afterlife. He read Raymond Moody's Life After Life, a groundbreaking 1975 book that compiled accounts of near-death experiences. He was fascinated by the stories of people who had clinically died and come back reporting tunnels of light, meetings with spiritual beings, and a profound sense of peace. These accounts gave him hope. They suggested that what he believed was true death was not an end but a transition to another state of being. He would spend hours in his room reading these books aloud to whoever was with him. He would talk endlessly about what happens when you die. He wanted to understand the process. He believed that if you were prepared, if you knew what to expect, you could navigate the afterlife successfully. He was like a student cramming for the most important exam of his life. He was particularly interested in the bardo, the intermediate state in Tibetan Buddhism between death and the next rebirth. He wanted to know how to avoid the pitfalls and achieve a favorable reincarnation. His actions also showed a man preparing for the end. He updated his will. He talked more and more about his mother, Gladys, and his desire to be reunited with her. His final concerts had a strange funereal quality. He would sing gospel songs with a desperate passion, as if he were singing for his own soul. He would perform My Way, and it sounded less like a song of triumph and more like a final statement, a man trying to justify his life before the end. Those around him saw the obsession. It was morbid, but it was also deeply spiritual. He wasn't just giving up, he was trying to face death on his own terms, with knowledge and faith. He was trying to turn his own tragic early death into a final act of spiritual exploration. He had spent his whole life searching for answers about the meaning of life. In the end, he turned that same intense focus to the meaning of death. He was trying to find a way to die a good death, even as he was living a self-destructive life. The contradiction was profound and heartbreaking. But was this intense study of death a brave spiritual preparation, or was it a symptom of a deep suicidal depression? Did reading about peaceful afterlife experiences make it easier for him to be reckless with his own health, viewing death as a welcome escape? And in his final conscious moments, did he believe he was successfully navigating the bardo, or was he just a terrified, lonely man whose body had finally given out? Number 1, did he believe he would come back? This is the ultimate rumor, the one that fuels the Elvis is alive sightings, and the enduring myth of the king. Did Elvis Presley believe he would cheat death, not just spiritually, but perhaps even physically? The answer, based on his complex belief system, is a qualified yes. His belief was not in a crude, zombie-like resurrection. It was rooted in the sophisticated ideas of reincarnation and spiritual evolution he had been studying for years. He believed, as taught in the Impersonal Life and the works of Yogananda, that the soul is immortal. This physical life was just a temporary stop. So, in that sense, he absolutely believed he would come back. He would be reborn into a new body to continue his spiritual journey. He told Priscilla that they would find each other again. He believed his work was not finished. This was the core of his hope. Death was not a final defeat. But there are hints of an even stranger belief. In some esoteric traditions, there is the idea of the avatar, a divine being who incarnates on Earth for a special purpose. There's also the concept of the ascended master, a soul that has evolved beyond the need for reincarnation but can choose to return to help humanity. Given Elvis's messianic complex and his belief that he was guided by masters, it's possible he saw himself in this light. Perhaps he believed he would not just be reborn as another person, but that he might return as Elvis, in some form, a spiritual guide from the other side. Think about the legacy he was so conscious of. He preserved his music, his image, his home. It was as if he were preparing a vessel for his spirit to inhabit. The undying loyalty of his fans, the quasi-religious status he achieved, even in life unsecured, he saw all of this. He believed his spirit could continue to work through his legacy, to inspire people and bring them spiritual uplift long after his body was gone. In a way, he was right. Elvis the man died on August 16, 1977, but Elvis the icon, the spiritual force, is arguably more powerful today than ever. The ultimate question is not whether he is physically hiding out somewhere. The real question is what he believed would happen. He spent more than a decade building a personal theology that assured him death was not the end. He believed in reincarnation, karma, and the immortality of the soul. He believed his life had a cosmic purpose that extended beyond one lifetime. So, yes, in the way that mattered most to him, Elvis Presley was absolutely convinced he would be back. He saw death not as a final curtain, but as an intermission. But if he truly believed he was coming back, why was his final act on earth one of such profound self-neglect and destruction? Was the promise of a future life a license to trash the current one? And if his spirit does live on, what would he think of the world he left behind? A world that has turned his Graceland home into a shrine, and his personal spiritual search into a set of strange and surprising rumors. Is the myth of his return the final fulfillment of his mission, or is it the ultimate misunderstanding of a man who was, in the end, just desperately searching for a way home?